Welcome to the Bold SLP podcast. We are so happy that you're here and can't wait to share with you all of the amazing conversations we've been having.
We are the co-founders of the Bold SLP Collective, and we are also your hosts, Lisa, Desi, and myself, Ingrid. Each of us has a variety of experiences in all things bilingual and bimodal speech-language pathology. You'll get to know us pretty well on here.
We started this podcast to share our lived experiences, but also because we want to bring advocacy and cultural humility to the forefront of every speech therapy conversation. We hope that you'll join us each week, and we hope that you enjoy this episode.
Welcome back to the Bold SLP podcast. I am here with Ingrid and Desi and myself, Lisa, and we have a special guest today, Tiffany from Talk Tea Speech. Hi, Tiffany.
Welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Tiffany is a speech and language pathologist and the creator of Talk Tea Speech, a brand that focuses on making an impact for SLPs, parents, and toddlers in early intervention. She has been an SLP for 5 years and specializes in speech therapy for children, birth to 5 years of age. Tiffany strongly believes in an integrated approach to therapy, working closely with families and other professionals to successfully execute treatment plans, optimize a child's full potential, and bring more joy into the home. You can find Tiffany at Talk Tea Speech on all social media platforms. Tiffany, I found you last year. I can hardly believe that it's only been 5 years that you've been an SLP. My mind is blown when I read that bio the first time. But I found you on Instagram, just randomly scrolling through all the regular kind of white faces that I see in speech. And then I found you. And the way you play with the camera, the little costumes that you wear, like all of it. I was like, I need more of this in my life. I just stalked your page and all your reels, and they just kept getting better and better. Even the humor. So I was so excited that you wanted to come and share with us your knowledge and expertise.
Yeah, that little robe with the bunny ears is famous. I love it. It's a robe, right, Tiffany? It's like a bathrobe for kids.
So, so that's when I do my toddler character.
Yeah, that's the toddler.
It's like a baby bathrobe that my future mother-in-law actually got for our puppy at the time. But he got so big and he didn't fit into it, and I don't have kids yet, so I'm like, I need to have this toddler character if I want to do early intervention reels. And so now that's just become a thing. And it's nice when I have like a bad hair day. I'm like, all right, I'm going to do the reel with the toddler because I could just put that robe on my head.
Brilliant. So tell us about your journey on social media as an Asian American SLP.
Okay, so it was May of 2020. So I think during that time of being home during COVID, I had a lot of time to just sit and think about what I wanted to do. And we were home a lot. And I was telling my fiance, Joe, I was like, should I start an Instagram account for speech? And that had been something I thought about in the past, but I was like, I'm going to run out of content. What am I really going to post about? I have a few strategies I use, like it's just going to get old. What am I going to do with it? But then COVID hit. I had all this time to sit and think, and I decided, okay, I'm going to just start it and see where it goes. It'll just be my own little creative outlet. So I didn't really come to it as okay, I'm going to be representing Asian SLPs. When I made the Instagram, I wasn't even thinking that, and I wasn't even aware of the lack of representation in our fields. I guess I knew it in the back of my mind somewhere, I'm sure, but it wasn't something in the forefront, and it wasn't something that I was like, okay, I'm going to do this so that I can represent my people. But as I kept going with it, I'm sure you guys know at that time period where there was a lot of Asian hate and all these attacks on Asian people, and it was such a scary time. And I remember thinking all right, how can I move forward because it's really scary. I'm thinking about my grandparents, I'm thinking about my parents going to the grocery store. And I was like, okay, instead of being so anxious about this every day, what could I do on my end to help? So I think that's usually where your anxiety can be helped if you go in with like, okay, how can I make a little bit of an impact? So I was like, okay, let me post about this and talk about my true feelings about it. And when I did, the feedback was so positive, and I felt like there was such a supportive community. And so that felt really, really nice. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't even realize that there is such a lack of representation. And I was one of like the few Asian SLPs on Instagram. And I was like, oh, wow, like, let me try to find more Asian SLPs. And, you guys know Lindsay from Help Me Grow Speech.
Yes.
I contacted her and I was like, maybe we should post something together and, just come together as a community during this difficult time. And I think it just felt really good to know that, oh, yeah, there are other Asian American SLPs out there who feel like I do, but it was just never something that was like thought about, spoken about. So yeah, and here we are.
Yeah. So the reason you joined Instagram was really just because of COVID and just a burst of creativity when you had like time to yourself. So it never occurred to you that you may not see faces that look like yours. That wasn't even a thought you had.
No, and growing up, we grew up in a town that was predominantly white, and even then I didn't realize that there was a lack of representation because you're just a kid and you just see what you see. Obviously, like TV shows and movies that we grew up watching was not Asian American actors and actresses.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just something that you might not even realize. And that's the crazy part, you might not know. And when I think back to my childhood, I remember thinking at one point, I was like, oh, I kind of wish that I was white. Like I felt like nobody looked like me and I didn't feel super comfortable in my own skin. That didn't happen until like later on. And I wonder what difference it would have made to see Asian Americans on the screen, in the movies. And now we have social media, so it's more accessible. But yeah, back then it wasn't. So it wasn't something I was aware of. But now I'm like, okay, this feels nice to have representation. And if I could be a part of it a little bit, then it feels good.
I'm just thinking about you. I'm wanting to be white because I think everyone I know in my community has had that feeling or that thought at some point in their lives growing up in like a predominantly white society. I wonder yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. You just want to fit in, you want to feel
that's
like
really it.
everybody else.
Yeah, I wonder though, this has been my experience a few times when I was starting out as an SLP, but did you ever face any kind of discrimination or microaggression, just like not looking like the average SLP when taking in clients?
I don't have a specific memory of that happening, but again, who knows? It's almost like I had these blinders on, so I'm not sure. Like sometimes things hit me after and I don't process it until after the moment. So it could have been something, but like I said, it just was not something I was so aware of.
I so relate to you on that point, Tiffany. I feel like I was like that as well. I didn't realize what I was missing. One of my, the thing that came to mind when you were talking about that is I didn't realize how much I needed a bilingual or Mexican American professor in grad school. Yes. Until last summer, I got the opportunity to work with one and interview her for another project. And just hearing her talk, like we collaborated a bunch previous to the episode and then to the recording. It was a podcast. And just hearing her talk and looking at her, like she looks like me and she looks like my mom. I was like, I so needed that. And I left grad school like never wanting to go back. And I know it's like I was far away from my family. It was hard. I was broke. But I wonder like if I'd found someone who made it more meaningful, maybe I wouldn't have hated it so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, to have somebody to look up to and be like, okay, this is a possibility for me
Yeah.
because this person who's so much like me, they did it, then I can do it.
Yeah. 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 I left that, it was last summer, and I'm like, she's a mom. She's Mexican American. She's Spanish bilingual, and she's a PhD running a lab and has students. And I never thought I could do that.
Yeah, you
And
just
I was, yeah, I was like, oh, it's because I'm busy or because I'm stressed, or, you know, but it's like maybe because I didn't see anybody doing it around me.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's 10 years later that I came to that realization.
Yeah, I realized that like people don't have to explicitly reject you from spaces. You could just not feel welcome just by looking around. So, do you feel like you've empowered like Asian or non-white SLPs to be SLPs through your page or just being you?
Well, it's interesting, like when I posted about needing more Asian representation, I got a lot of messages saying, oh, wow, this is really helpful. Or like, I was feeling this way too. And now I really feel like I'm seen or heard. And again, it was like, oh, wow, I was just kind of posting this because I was like, I want to get this thought off of my chest. And this is just something I've been thinking about. But I wasn't thinking that like it would resonate with so many people. So yes, not that I feel like I have all this power, but I do.
More than you think. Yeah, more than you think.
I feel happy that I have this platform where people can see, oh yeah, there are Asian American SLPs out there. And yeah, it makes me feel really proud to be Asian American. And that's the thing too. I think as I've gotten older and, you know, with realizing representation matters, it's really made me feel like, okay, I really want to take pride in being Asian American. And in our field, it's so rare for some reason. I don't, they're just not on social media, but it's rare. And so I'm like, okay, I'm just going to take it and be proud of it.
Yeah.
It's rare everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. I dig into the demographics report every time it comes out, and it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed in 10 years.
Why do you
It's the
think
same. I mean, loaded question, right? So historically where our field comes from. Oh, Desi, yay. Desi, tell us why.
I'm sorry, what?
Tiffany was asking why our field is so white.
Oh,
She wasn't asking that. That's what I'm answering.
She said, do you know where that comes from? And then Ingrid spun it to get her thinking a little deeper.
No, I know that is historically where our field comes from,
Yeah.
you know, and then also like the master's degree thing is a very difficult step for a lot of people who are not in a privileged position. So I don't know.
I've been to a continuing ed, and they were talking about how we originally were called speech correctionists. So again, like that idea that I'm the standard, I'm the, you know, the measuring stick. I'll fix you.
Right.
So it's just a different mentality. Hopefully, I hope we're moving away from that. But I mean, then again, we do have pathologists in our name. So
we need a whole rebrand.
I think so. And I think, you know, I know in the special ed community, they talk about accessibility, so, you know, and supports. And I think that that's hopefully, I mean, I envision that more as what my job is. And I try to embrace that. And I really wish we all did, just because correctionist just gives me the
heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, but that's where we come from, you know, like Desi said, like setting up a standard, setting up what's correct, and you know what's normally been correct is what's
and who had access to those spaces. I mean, it was white men and then eventually white women. So it makes sense that, you know, our field is still predominantly white in that regard. And I just think just by the very nature of what our field is, which is like the intersection between education and medicine, I do think that that's where we're still in this. I mean, I even think about like how little people actually know about what we do. Like when I tell somebody I'm a speech therapist, they're like, oh, so you do. And usually what they say is something that I don't actually do, or I do very little of. So I feel like that also might be contributing, the fact that we're not accurately represented, to different communities, especially like we're probably less familiar to communities of color, for example, as a profession. I mean, I know that all of us here, Lisa, Ingrid, and I have talked about how we didn't really think of doing speech therapy until like the very end of our undergraduate careers, or I know in Lisa's case, like she was already teaching when she found out about it. So, I know a lot of people have exposure to a speech therapist either like because of a sibling or something like that. And then some people have told me that, yeah, oh, my mom is a speech therapist, or my aunt is one, or my parents gave me this guidance and I started observing speech therapists in high school or in college. Like it's a totally different access point than I think any of us had to that world.
Yeah, I think a lot of families, well, immigrant families, I can speak for my family, they liken my job to like an elocution specialist, which they used to have in Sri Lanka. So it's like, how can you make us sound more American or more Canadian? And that was never in the cards for me. I was like, communication and speech are two different things. And then we have to go through that whole, I'm thinking of you, Tiffany, like, especially in like the pediatric world, you're like, I doubt you're working on R's and S's. And, I feel like you're empowering families to like build those connections with their children. And I mean, I watch your videos, so I know that that's what you're doing. The last one I watched, you were talking about just like getting at their level. And I remember you were acting like the kid and you're like, what are you even saying? And I love that so much because we don't give enough credit to the kids, like of what they're thinking or how they might be feeling about this whole situation. It's very like this authoritative model of like, I know best because I'm the adult and you need to speak this way, not knowing that they have a whole personality in there that will come out when they're ready in the way they want it to. And I love it. I love your video so much.
Thank you. But definitely, I mean, I had posted a video about, this was the most recent one, how sometimes toddlers might not want to clean up and they might dump out all of their toys. So I talked about different opportunities to turn that into incorporating speech and language skills, even though they're doing, they're making a mess. I had a comment on it and this guy was like, oh, well, you could turn this into a teaching lesson or discipline and yada, yada, yada. And I feel like that happens a lot when I talk about following a child's lead and, letting them learn through play. I get that pushback from people sometimes where they're like, oh, well, how are children going to learn? You have to give them boundaries. They're going to walk all over you. And I'm like, it doesn't mean that you're not providing boundaries. But when they feel like they want to clean up because it's fun, because you're turning it into a game, because you're teaching them and they feel confident that they can do it, then it's a whole different child. And that's like my whole philosophy behind it, where it's like we need to follow their lead, because when we don't, we're basically saying, I don't really care what you have to say because you're just a toddler. I mean, if you know toddlers, they are like, they have their personalities and they're so strong. They can think for themselves. And when we dismiss them and just say like, no, you're going to listen to what I say, and that's the end of it, then that shuts them down and then they don't want to communicate. And that's our goal. We want them to communicate what they feel, what they want and need. And so when people say you need to discipline them, it's like, okay, do you want your toddler to follow through because they want to and they're having a good time and they're happy? Or do you want them to follow through because they're scared that they will get in trouble? So that's really the whole philosophy behind it.
Well, all
I
these
love
things that you're saying, we don't want them to do, like all these things that you're saying, as in, do you want them to react out of fear, or like, do you want them to retain their own personalities, or just basically, I think I'm hearing like, do you want blind obedience, or do you want a true personality? And I think blind obedience goes back to the original model of speech therapy, the original
Compliance.
foundation, you know?
Yes. And I think people sometimes are scared to hear that. Like when we say we want them to not be so compliant, we want them to, we want to follow their lead. They're almost taking it so personally, as if I'm saying, you've been doing it wrong all this time. Now we're evolving, but that's not what I'm saying. I think that we can all learn and evolve. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect. There are so many things that I had done in the past with my therapy. And now when I learned new ways and I've seen how it changes the whole way a toddler acts and their joy and everything. So I think it's okay for new research and new methods to come out, and for us to say, oh, okay, I was kind of doing it wrong in the past. That wasn't working, but I'm going to make these changes, and that's okay.
100%.
Yeah. I think about my own toddler actually, because I mean, now that my son is 3, and even yesterday, oh man, we had some moments. He's just a very independent 3-year-old, and I did watch that same video earlier this week. Whenever you posted it, it made me think about, extrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation, which I know is something really, especially in looking at like the strengths-based model, for example, like working with children who are autistic or children with developmental delays. And I think that that's something that, as an SLP, has influenced my parenting, finding that intrinsic motivation for my son. Although sometimes it's not possible. I think that's where the boundary is, right? Like people don't recognize that you're teaching, right? Teaching requires intrinsic motivation on the part of your student. Parenting is a totally different world, and it doesn't have to be so separated. I think it's really important. I think being an SLP has made me a better parent. And I think at the same time, my SLP skills have also influenced my parenting. It's hard to take off my hat. Yeah, but I think that it's really nice to hear that, because I've definitely seen early intervention sessions before, like either observed them or just witnessed different tactics, especially because I do preschool. So related, but definitely, not the same. And it really can just blow up in your face. Like, kids don't want to trust you, even as early as 3 years old, especially if you just come in and you want to commandeer the room.
Exactly. Yeah. And I tell parents that too. I can tell you certain strategies and show you, but sometimes you're just going to have days where it doesn't work, and it's okay. I think it's when I'm posting these reels that are like 30 seconds long, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to do that. It's so easy and it's fun. But there are days where I'm trying the same strategies during my sessions and they're not working because the child she's not having it, or she's in a bad mood. And that's just like us. And I tell parents that too, we all have bad days and good days. So some sessions, all of those strategies are going to seem like they're miracles. And sometimes it's going to be like, why are we even doing speech? It's not working. Yeah. So it's going to be a toss-up.
You were talking about that feeling of shame sometimes that parents feel. And that too feels very historical, where like parents were just shamed left, right, and center. And I want to say immigrant families specifically, just like, we're doing it all wrong. And like, they really internalize that. And there is a way of presenting strategies and just resources in general without that shame. And we have to think about it before we present it. Because sometimes some parents are just prone to that. Immediately they'll be like, oh my gosh, I've been doing it wrong, even before you say anything.
Yeah.
You really have to think about it, preface it in a way that's like culturally appropriate, and just, oh, okay, that's how it goes at your house. Okay, let's try this, and none of that, like, I wouldn't do it that way, or that's not how we do it here. And I know parents have heard those kinds of statements before, not from you, of course, Tiffany. But in general, I like that you brought up that like theme of shame, because that's just a recurring theme that we really need to dispel, because we're not, it's hard enough to be a parent already, and then the pandemic, and then multiple languages, and not feeling like you belong. And then on top of it, to have a professional that's supposed to be on your side and the child's side make you feel bad, is just like a recipe for disaster.
Right. There's a lot of guilt attached, especially in early intervention, when the parents start to see, okay, I think my child has a speech or language delay, and they immediately go to, well, what did I do wrong? Why is this happening? What could I have done better? And there are just things that are out of our control, and I feel lucky that in early intervention, I get to work directly with parents, and I'm in their home, and I can see what the dynamics are, and how they communicate with their child. And I can really talk to parents about what the goal is for their family, their home life, for their toddler. But I wonder, like, what the difference is, like, if a school SLP, you don't get to see the parents or talk to them all the time. So there's a lack of communication there, where, like, if parents are just receiving these notes or, whatever they are getting from the school SLP, they're not able to like really communicate and say, oh, okay, like, or ask follow-up questions or things like that. So in early intervention, I feel lucky that I'm able to speak to the parents directly, but it could be very, very tricky as the child gets older.
Yeah, it's really difficult for parents to implement something they haven't seen, wasn't modeled for them, is a random line in an IEP or in a note that was sent home in between report cards and things. Yeah, it's pretty tough. I love that you're putting the relationship with the parents at the forefront, because we do need more of that. But we have these like heavy caseloads where it would make it nearly impossible to have relationships with each parent on top of, I'm not saying that it's an excuse, it's what's happening, it's the reality.
Right. And I was going to say, it's even more difficult for families where English is not their first language. Mm-hmm. So you can't just send your SLP a follow-up email with some questions, because it might not be that simple, and that's where I think about, maybe if back in the day, if my grandma had to speak to an English speaking SLP, it would be impossible. And I really wish there were more resources to find bilingual SLPs or get a translator. I think that's definitely something that needs more work.
Do you consider yourself a bilingual SLP?
I would say I consider myself bilingual because I speak English and Cantonese. But as far as being a bilingual SLP, I was toying around with this question, because I'm like, do I feel like I could provide a service in Cantonese? And I think at the level of like, it would just depend on the level of language that toddler has. And I speak to my grandparents in Cantonese, but that's truly the only time. So my Cantonese is very conversational. So I would like to still have a translator. So if I had a family who spoke Cantonese, even though I speak it, I wouldn't say that I would be completely efficient in or proficient in speaking Cantonese for a session. So I've had like Spanish speaking toddlers and families, and when I would bring in a translator, that was like so helpful, because I could provide carryover strategies and even get simple verbal models from the parents, so I could imitate what the parents say to the child. And so I'm thinking, like, if I were to do that in Cantonese on my own, could I really? I'm not totally sure, but yeah, I'm definitely I'm bilingual, but I don't know if I would consider myself a bilingual SLP.
Yeah,
This is
I
such
think
a common thread.
Such
with
a common
heritage-
thread.
It's such a common thread where the heritage speakers are underselling their
I
language.
don't understand it. Please
well,
help me.
I think I get it. I totally get it. So
I'm like, no, Tiffany, you
I
gotta
get
sign
it.
up on every list. Be there for your community. You speak to your grandparents in Cantonese.
problem-
You can do it.
the problem that I had when I graduated high school, it was the same thing. I was conversational, but it was like home conversation. It was very context dependent. Do you want to eat now? Do you want to eat later? Where's your brother? Right.
Right.
What are you going to do this weekend? I didn't have a whole lot of complex vocabulary, or even like, I'm even thinking of my own like mean length of utterance back then. You know what I mean? Like I just couldn't put together complex or constructions, and I was always inevitably missing words. So even though it was the same way with me, the people that I mostly spoke with in Spanish were my grandparents. And every once in a while, my mom and I would speak in Spanish. My dad and I would speak in Spanish. It just wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. I think my expectations, like if I had never studied Spanish or gone abroad to improve my Spanish, like I think I would feel the same way, a little bit hesitant. And I think that's natural. But I do think that at the same time, I agree with what Ingrid and Lisa say. Like, I think that there is so much value to the cultural heritage you have, the linguistic heritage you have. Maybe you just need a boost, and we're here to give you a little boost.
I think that now, like hearing you guys talk about it, I'm like, okay, well, if not me, then who's going to do it? Because like we were saying, there are not a lot of Asian SLPs. So I think if it really came down to it, I would just step up and learn a little bit more and definitely do it. So if the opportunity presents itself, I'll do it, guys, and I'll let you know.
Yes,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think like the hardest thing with the toddlers and what you do for being bilingual would be how to learn how to learning the phonology part of things, because it's so muddled when they're that little. I'm thinking like, what challenges did I have when I was in early intervention?
Or if the parents have like complex questions that you might not be able, like if there's a motor speech concern, I mean, not that I would ever like launch into an explanation about like motor neurons, but, even just saying like, oh, like it's like a disconnection between the brain and the mouth, like that's how usually I break it down in English. And that can be hard.
Yeah. And I think, like as we continue to talk, I think if there are moments where if I was working with a Cantonese speaking family and there were questions that came up and I didn't know, I would just say, let me find out and get back to you. And I do that every day. There are times when parents ask me questions in English and I still don't know it. So it actually doesn't matter if it's in Cantonese or English.
It doesn't matter. I grew up in Mexico. I didn't come to the US until I was 16, but I trained in grad school in English, and I still have to look up things because I wasn't trained in Spanish. So a lot of the terms, like I was asking an podcast, she's from Guatemala, and I was like, how do you say diet of coconut grapes in Spanish? And she's like, I don't know. I think we just say syllable rates. And then like 2 days later, she DM'd me. She's like, I found it. I asked the professor, like I found the term. And I'm like, she is a Spanish speaker from Guatemala, practicing in Guatemala. And she doesn't know what these things are called because our field is so new here. And it's so new all over the world that the research, like a lot of the people in other countries are learning from the research in English. Like Desi taught us the other day. And I'm like, I had no idea. I thought people just did their own thing. But yeah, that we're all connected and we're all still learning and we're all asking questions all the time.
Exactly.
So I have all kinds of identity crises and just listening to all of you because my two languages are French and English. But then I was like, but am I really French? Because I'm Sri Lankan. And then Desi and Ingrid always empowering me to be like, yeah, but you like grew up in the French culture and like you have all that. Anyway,
Desi speaks English, French, Sri Lankan, and she knows ASL, and she didn't think she
Lisa,
was bilingual. Lisa.
oh, I do
Yeah.
not speak Tamil. I need you to stop saying that.
Oh my gosh, Lisa, you do.
I
That's
actually do not.
amazing.
I do not speak Tamil. I understand some, but I'm going to look into it more. But no, I can't even, like, Tiffany, you mentioned you talked to your grandparents in Cantonese. I cannot speak to my grandparents in Tamil. I don't speak Tamil. Like, I can't.
Aw.
But I do speak French. And
Yes,
much
I
like
heard you.
much like Tiffany, I'm like, yeah, but I don't have like the sophisticated speech language to do it. So I'm just gonna like avoid it altogether. But I do sometimes, because I'm in a French English like milieu in Montreal. So it does happen where someone presents me a case and I assume it's English. And when they get to my office, they are fully French. And
Oh,
it's
wow.
too late. Like I don't have an interpreter or whatever. And I don't need an interpreter. I'll be fine. But there's an expression in French, je me débrouille. It's like I'm gonna make it work, you know? So then in those moments where I'm kind of stuck with this family, I slow down my pace because I have to think in English before it comes out French. I don't know the diakinetic type vocab, so I explain it even better in like the words that I have. And those sessions are actually richer than my English ones because I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to do as an SLP because I'm forced to do it because I have to slow down. So it's something to think about if you want to take on some cases.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's very encouraging.
Yes, please
No
write
pressure.
to us as soon as you get that Cantonese case, please.
I know, but that's the thing. I don't even have the opportunity to have a case in Cantonese. And, like I think also maybe sometimes with the Asian culture, there's a lot of like, we're just going to see how it goes. Everything's fine. We're going to wait and see. Even experiences with family, friends, you have to tread very lightly because you don't want to offend anyone if you feel that there are some concerns. But the general consensus is like, we're going to wait and see. It's probably fine. So, yeah. So I wonder if that's like something within the Asian culture where there's not, it's not as common to seek help in the areas of communication and speech and language. So that's why I don't see a lot of cases with Chinese speaking families.
I see it in South Asian culture. There's of course just it's the stigmatization of any kind of pathology or disorder or whatever you want to call it. But there's also resources. Like it's very expensive to go to a professional if you're not 100% sure that that's what's going on. And oftentimes they'll bounce around until they like the speech therapist will say psychology, the psychologist might say speech might say OT. Like not these families don't have the money to get evaluations all over the place. So there's a combination of that, I feel, which is probably why you're not seeing more cases.
And I think the pendulum that I talk about swinging, like where in the schools we over-identify bilinguals, especially bilinguals from minoritized backgrounds. The pediatrician's office are like, oh, y'all are a bilingual house? No, don't worry. His speech or his language will catch up. He's just behind because you guys don't speak English at home.
Yeah, that's what I hear a lot too
Yep.
among Latino families. But also at least in the Latino community, it's also a thing. Like it's very stigmatized to seek outside help. It's very stigmatizing. Like people are like, oh, your kid's doing what? What's going on with them? It's like a community-based concern. And so it's really hard to come forth with that information. And then, maybe somebody in your family's not familiar with it and they think you're doing something bizarre. Here in Maine, for example, like there's a really big Somali community. And I know that that's also a really big topic. It's really stigmatized to seek outside help or to even talk about your child's disability. So much so to the point that like, it's almost like you're supposed to keep your kid indoors, it's really sad. And I think that that's what happens in these marginalized communities. Again, not that they are always marginalized in every single aspect of their identity, but at the same time, I just think that there's this cultural burden sometimes that holds families back.
Oh, yes.
I thought I had moved past all of this, and I didn't know how much I had internalized what I learned in my culture and the stigmatization, because I went to evaluate a girl, a white girl in her basement. And as I was finishing up the eval, her family like showed up for a barbecue. So they were all upstairs and we were alone. It was me and her, and then her mother was upstairs. But then all of a sudden, like her whole family showed up for like a surprise, I don't know what. And I was so nervous to walk up those stairs and show myself and introduce myself. I was just, I don't know where that fear came from. I was like to asking the mom, should I go through the back? Like she was like, no, just come up. What are you talking about? So as I walked up, she was like, this is so-and-so speech therapist, and like just like fully like open. And I was like, I wonder why I was so scared, or where I got that idea that they didn't want to introduce me, or it's, you know.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that, because I feel like also in my culture, it's like, yeah, you have to hide these things. It's a secret. We can't tell people that you have to go see this specialist or this or that. It's that stays within the family. Whereas other cultures, it's just common. It's fine. Yeah, people get speech, people get OT. That's fine. And yeah, I do wish it was more common where it's okay.
I think it's that feeling of otherness. Like we already feel different to begin with because we don't match with like this mainstream culture or this perception of mainstream culture. So then on top of that, to add a disability is like furthering us from what we're supposed to be. And it's too much. So they just want to hide it away, you know, and they didn't have access to these supports for so long, and whereas the mainstream culture did, so they're already used to it and they're past all of this, like we're ashamed of it. So really there's like ways to go, you know, to just make it accessible to everyone and not fear it.
Definitely. But I think we're starting to move forward and there's more awareness now. I mean, what you guys are doing on your podcast and social media, there's so much more accessibility to all of this.
So thank you so much for being here and sharing all of this with us. It was a very rich conversation. We do end with a last word, just like something that we got from this conversation, something we learned, something that we want to take away with us. So Desi, give it to us.
Well, I really like what Tiffany said about meeting the family where they're at. I think it's a really big part of what we do. And I hope that this conversation kind of inspires other people to think about the different facets that might go into meeting a family where they're at, whether it's socioeconomically or culturally, or in terms of like stigma, like we were talking about. So I think that's my word or phrase.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'm taking away from this conversation is probably being enough. Like you are bilingual enough, you are, a representative of your community, and enough, like enough. And I feel like we all have those questions about ourselves all the time. So it's nice to hear, that we're not alone in questioning, like, are we doing enough? I question it all the time. Like, do I know enough to be posting about this? Do I know enough to start a private practice, focusing on linguistic diversity? Do I know enough to start a podcast? Like, constantly questioning myself and learning from all these conversations that questioning comes from a very insidious place that I need to like look into.
I'm thinking
being
about
enough.
the power of representation. Just your face, Tiffany, you didn't even know, but it like gave so much hope to so many other, not just Asian SLPs, but just people in general who don't look like the whatever a typical SLP is supposed to look like. So just the power of representation.
Yeah, I love that. And I think bringing it back to like the feeling that I felt when I was younger of wanting to fit in, I think that's how we all still are. We want to be represented, we want to feel included. And I think when we go in as SLPs to any family of any culture, we have to keep that in mind, that people just want to be accepted. And no matter what background you're from, you're not doing anything wrong. The families, I think sometimes you want so badly to be accepted because you're of a different cultural background. So you almost like, you feel that guilt. And I want SLPs and families to be able to just have that open communication and be open about what the goals are, and have the SLP really work with the family and, like you said, meet them where they're at and know that everyone's just trying their best. And so it's okay. We're going to have good days, bad days, no matter what background you come from. Everybody feels the same, and that is that they just want to be accepted and feel like they're making progress. So thank you so much for having me, and I really learned so much from this conversation.
Us too. Acceptance. Thank you so much, Tiffany.
Thank you for listening and supporting the Bold SLP Collective. You can find a closed caption version of this podcast on our YouTube channel. We will also have show notes on our website. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you do all the podcast things. Follow, subscribe, download, and review. And don't forget, we love hearing from you, so connect with us on Instagram at the Bold SLP Collective. Stay bold and humble. See you next time.